Good afternoon, and welcome to First Presbyterian Church. I'm Robbie Flint, and my wife Donna Flint and I serve as co-pastors here for this congregation. We were Bob's pastors the last few years. Thank you, Mary, for the beautiful music that you just played. This week, Bob's family came across a number of organ pieces that were arranged by Horace Fishback III, Bob's brother. And the family asked if Mary could play those for you today. I think they're very lovely pieces, so thank you for making those pieces possible. Also, you may have recognized the final piece, which was one of Bob's favorite pieces of music, the John Dunbar theme from the movie Dances with Wolves. Welcome to a celebration in the life of Robert Bob Fishback. And thank you so much for being here to remember Bob and his legacy. And now, Bob's family has asked that we open this service with the following words of meditation. We gather in this hour of holy stillness to honor the life and the person we love. In this hour of holy stillness, we offer ourselves to share the weight of each other's grief. Our grief is a holy thing. It is the mark of love, the mark of connection, and the mark of a life well lived. Those words name the love and the grief that bring us here together today. And from that place of stillness, we turn our attention to this space, this sanctuary, here where Bob came on Sunday mornings, week after week throughout his life, as a lifelong member of this congregation. And as you look around this sanctuary, the warm woodwork, the beautiful stained glass windows that catch the light this time of day as well as at night, the sound of the beautiful organ, which is a Fishback family legacy, and our beautiful grand piano that was purchased by Bob and Pat and dedicated to Bob's parents. You're seeing the familiar beauty that surrounded Bob each Sunday morning. For Bob grew up in this congregation, joining officially as a confirmant in the year 1950. Whereas I became a member of this church about 25 years ago, or roughly 50 years after Bob Fishback became a member and joined here. I soon learned that Bob's place was always easy to spot here. For on most Sundays and for many decades, his place was right over there in the choir loft where you can see his robe today at this time. Singing in the choir each week with steady dedication. And eventually, when he was no longer singing in the choir, he was seated just over here, pretty much in the corner right before the wall breaks. That was until COVID hit. And it was at that time that Bob began attending services, watching services online. And he continued to do so for the past few years. So for most of his life, Bob was here each and every Sunday. This sanctuary was a regular weekly gathering place, a place where his faith was nurtured, a constant in an ever-changing world, the place where generations of Fishbacks had worshiped before him. And Bob Fishback did not just attend church here, he served here. Bob served as an elder, helping the church navigate seasons of change. He was a loyal member of the finance committee, for more than 50 years. Still meeting each and every month, right up until just a very few months ago. And Bob also served as treasurer for this church, tending to the practical needs of the congregation with care and integrity. So Bob's presence here, faithful, dependable, humble, and unassuming, was a steady part of this congregation. And now we gather here in Bob's church to remember all the facets of his life, his quiet faith, the public roles that he carried on with responsibility, the quieter moments that he shared with his family, his deep love for those who were closest to him, his respect for the generations who came before him, and his hopes for the generation that would follow him. And so it is that we gather here at this time to support Bob's family as they move through their grief. We gather here to share stories and memories that should help us to hold on to what mattered most about Robert Bob Fishback. And so today we gather with gratitude for a life that was grounded in faith, shaped by love, and lived with steadiness, generosity, and a purpose. Thank you all for being here as we honor the memory of Bob Fishback. I'd now like to invite Bob's brother Van forward to introduce the family.
Good afternoon. The family joins me also in welcoming all of you today. We're glad you're here. We'll have many good memories, and we'll have good fellowship, and it will be a good day. One of the things that we wanted to start with is a little bit unusual. We're going to introduce ourselves. And that's not something that you're quite always expecting. And Gail, wherever you are, don't worry, you don't have to stand up and say anything. It's just going to be a stand up, sit down, okay? But we do notice that as people come to weddings and funerals, they know where the family is, but they don't know really who is who. And so what we're trying to do is lift out each one of us and have us in our own way tell you that we're pleased that you were here, and I personally am pleased that they are here, and there will be fellowship afterwards. And we hope that this introduction will encourage you to possibly stop by, say hello, share a few words, and possibly a few stories. So here we go. It's a stand up, sit down, so there's not going to, it's not like we'll be here all day. Patty Sebastian Fishback. John Fishback. Amanda Mitchell. William Cornick, Stephen Fishback. Francisca Margaret Fishback. Anne Margaret Rivlin. Joe Rivlin. Abby Margaret Rivlin. Toby Sebastian Rivlin. Van Fishback. Sit down. Barbara Fishback. Tom Fishback. Mary Beth Fishback. May Fishback. Ollie Fishback. Paul Fishback. Erica Bull. James Fishback. Nadine Fishback. Sky Kirby. Owen Fishback. Archer Fishback. Nason Fishback Jr. Chip, I'm reading this thing and it tells me to say Nason Fishback Jr. We'll call you Junior the rest of the day. Kenneth Fishback. Margaret Cornelia Van Tol. Helen Van Tol Bettino. Gail Kennedy Coleman. Hardin Kennedy Coleman. Marlene Sebastian. Megan Sebastian Wright. Adrian Wright. And Ethan Wright. Thank you.
This time I would like to invite Bob's daughter, Ann, forward.
Thank you all for joining us today. I am Ann Fishback Rivlin. I am one of the 2 people on earth lucky enough to call Bob Fishback Dad. We are gathered here to celebrate his life in the way my mother Pat, my brother John, and I thought he would like best. We are here at the First Presbyterian Church, which our family helped found, and of which Dad was a dedicated member and enthusiastic choir participant. We are going to sing hymns together. Dad's family had hymn sings on Sunday throughout his childhood. He loved gathering with his loved ones and singing favorite hymns, as well as favorite pieces of secular music. While this stopped being a weekly tradition, for Dad, a highlight of the visits back to Brookings by his older siblings, Horace, Nason, Mary, and their children, was the chance to sing together and revisit family members' favorite songs. Today, we have selected music that we know Dad loved. As Pastor Robbie said, several of the prelude pieces were composed by Horace Fishback III, Dad's eldest brother. You may have heard the John Dunbar theme from Dances with Wolves earlier. He loved to play this song on the piano, and he did so many nights during my teenage years. We will sing For the Beauty of the Earth, a favorite of Margaret Fishback's, Dad's mother's, as well as Dad himself. How Can I Keep From Singing was a favorite of the Presbyterian Church choir that Dad enjoyed singing. Fierce Was the Wild Billow is a hymn perfect for deep bass voices that my grandfather, Horace Fishback Jr., loved. Finally, Now the Day Is Over is the song that ended every family hymn sing. If you are, like me, not known for your singing voice, do not worry. What mattered to Dad was the shared creation and enjoyment of music. We are also going to tell stories about Dad's life. Given that Dad was a modest man, happiest quietly helping others, This may be the part of the day that he would like the least. However, we want to celebrate his life. So we are going to tell the stories that we think best embody him. We are also going to hear two of Dad's grandchildren, Francesca and Abby, read a poem that Dad had on his office wall at the bank. The poem is by R.L. Sharp. Finally, following the service, there will be refreshments in the church basement. He would love the chance to talk to friends and family and enjoy a sweet treat as well. We are particularly grateful for your attendance today, given the wintry weather we've experienced recently. It is perhaps apt that Dad left us between snowstorms, as he was born during a snowstorm. Grandfather had to use a sleigh to take Dad's older siblings to the hospital to meet Dad. I can't help but compare this story with the fact that many of you are attending this service virtually. What changes Dad saw across his life. The stories I am going to tell are about Dad as a father and a grandfather. I cannot overstate enough how lucky I am to have Bob Fishback as my dad. Many among us have heard Dad say, "Children are precious." I didn't need to hear him say it. I knew it every day of my childhood, and whenever I saw Dad with any of his grandchildren. He loved kids, particularly kids who were members of his family. I remember his patience with me. As a young child, at the age when many are scared of the dark, Dad would sit at the top of the steps by my bedroom, reading paperwork necessary for the next day at the bank until I fell asleep. I saw Dad exhibit the same patience with my own kids. When Abby was born, Dad held her for hours while she napped in his arms. Also, I, an exhausted first-time mom, could try to nap as well. When Toby was a toddler, there was no one more exciting than Pa Bob. Dad was escorted around his home and yard by Toby, who would only let go of his hand if Dad carried him. Dad could read for hours to his grandchildren, book after book after book. One of the benefits of having an older sibling is when I mentioned to John how amazed I was at how Dad patiently read to the kids, John remembered Dad doing the same thing for me when I was little. His exact words were, "That's Dad in his natural environment, reading to kids." Dad was also fun-loving. He was up for anything we wanted to do as kids. I remember pretending to be Arctic explorers in the pasture, speculating about what it meant when we came across an unexpected snowdrift. We played countless games of baseball in the front yard of our home on 6th Avenue, with 3 conveniently positioned trees as the bases. Dad even took delight in playing hide and seek with my horse and I in the pasture. I have to imagine some of his delight was trying not to laugh at the absurdity of someone on horseback trying to hide, but Dad was always game to play. Winter Saturday afternoons often meant we would go to the bank to get stir-crazy kids out of the house. John and I would ride the janitor's cart down the ramp of the bank building at 5th and 5th. We would climb the teller line, using it as our own personal monkey bars. The imprinting machines for certified checks were another source of fascination. Dad was always clear that if we moved something, we had to put it back. But one can't help but feel we caused a few tellers to scratch their heads on Monday mornings. Dad had a lifelong habit of going for drives. He would want to check on how the crops were doing, or see how a particular farmer, maybe someone just starting out on their own, was doing. He might want to check on flooding, or see if the crops looked too dry. One constant of my childhood was Dad asking if I wanted to join him on a drive. I usually did, so we explored the roads around Brookings together. One day, when I was about 10, Dad asked if I wanted to go for a drive. I hopped in the car, and we started driving around town. It was very confusing. This was not a typical drive. We were in town. Furthermore, we were not terribly far from our house. We were kind of circling downtown, and Dad would periodically drive very slowly past a building and gaze at it with an intensity usually reserved for evaluating the progress of corn or soybeans. I finally asked, "What are we doing?" Dad told me he wanted the bank to have a daycare center, and he wanted to scout out whether a few buildings that he had heard might be for sale would work. I helpfully said it should have a play area. He said he was worried about parking and the safety of kids if they were near a parking lot. We identified what seemed like a possible candidate. Dad reported to me a few weeks later that he had learned the building had asbestos in it, so it was off the table. I'm not sure how far along in the process that drive was, but I'm delighted to report that a few years later, I was allowed to miss part of the school day to attend the dedication of Kids World, the bank's child care center. If I had a list of the sentences I heard most often from Dad, I know that "I love you" would be at the top. A contender for the second most frequent sentence is, "I think you're doing great." I don't know when Dad first started saying this to me, but I first started really noticing it when I was a young adult. Dad would put his arm around my shoulders and say, just loud enough for me to hear, "I think you're doing great." As I look back, I realize he tended to say it when I least thought I was doing well. Coming home for Thanksgiving after starting graduate school, not sure I was smart enough to actually be able to finish a degree, Dad was there with his quiet, "I think you're doing great." Starting a new career for the federal government, surrounded by brilliant people, and just not sure what I could possibly provide to my new role, Dad was there with his quiet, "I think you're doing great." A tired, scared, overwhelmed new mom, Dad was there with his quiet, "I think you're doing great." I am grateful for the model Dad provided. Pay attention, care about others, help them. Tell them when they are doing great, especially if you can tell they do not think they are. If you want instructions for how to make a difference, I cannot think of any better. In his tribute to his father, Horace Fishback Jr., at my grandfather's memorial service in 1968, my dad said this more eloquently. "It seems to us that the greatest thing a parent can do is to make his life count in some way, and thereby be an inspiration to his children. This Dad has done, and for it we are proud." I think we could say our dad has carried on this family tradition, and we too are proud. I have one final story to share. One day, my family was sitting at the kitchen table having lunch. Mom was very concerned about a local issue, and she spent lunch animatedly explaining the problem and developing a solution for it. I wish I could tell you which of the many community issues Mom has improved in Brookings it was, but what I most remember from that lunch is the look of pride on Dad's face as he watched his partner exhibit the same love for Brookings that he had. I realized then that what I wanted in a partner was someone who was as proud of me and what I could do as Dad was of Mom. I need to pause for a moment to say how deeply grateful I am to Mom. When Dad and Mom chose to spend their lives together, they likely were thinking only of the good times, not the challenges that come with the end of life. However, Dad was lucky. As Dad moved from the twilight of his life to the dark of night,
Mom showed almost superhuman devotion and caregiving. We could not be more grateful. Dad would have been amazed by the outpouring of support we have received and the appreciation that so many people have had of his kindness, honesty, and commitment to the community. He did not think his way of life was anything unusual. He thought being kind, helping others, being honest, and trying to help your community was just how people should be. I thank you all for your support for us during this difficult time.
Thank you, Ann. Pat and Ann, John, even Bob, have told me that the next hymn was Bob's mother, Margaret, her favorite hymn. So if you would, please stand as you're able and join in singing the hymn For the Beauty of the Earth, which is in the blue hymnal, number 473. We will be singing verses 1, 2, and 4. Seated. Two of Bob's grandchildren, Franny and Abby, will now share a poem. Please come forward.
This poem was hung on the wall of our Grandpa Bob's office. It was written out by hand and framed for him by a customer.
It's called A Bag of Tools.
Isn't it strange
That princes and kings
and clowns that caper
and sawdust rings
and common people
like you and me,
are builders for eternity?
each is given a bag of tools,
A shapeless mass,
a book of rules.
and each must make
Ere life is flown,
a stumbling block.
or a stepping stone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, young ladies, Abby and Franny. Our next hymn was sung at Bob's mother's funeral. It was also a special song for Bob, so please remain seated as we sing How Can I Keep From Singing? In the red hymnal, number 821, we'll sing verses 1, 2, 3, and 4. Bob's son, John, forward to say a few words. John Fishback.
Good afternoon. My name is John Fishback. I'm the other person who got to call Bob Fishback Dad. And I'm not sure he'd be entirely comfortable with what I'm about to say, because I'm about to tell you that Bob Fishback was a great man. And probably more uncomfortably for him, I'm going to tell you why I think so. He wouldn't care for that, because he was a deeply humble person. And that humility was making me feel a little uneasy about saying all of this. Until we were going through some old papers this week, and I found an editorial note published in the newspaper here in Brookings shortly after my grandfather Horace died. The title is, "He Left a Legacy," and the first sentence reads, "Horace Fishback would object to this editorial comment." And it goes on to say that he would poo-poo the idea that he was a fit subject for editorial praise, which means I am not disregarding my father's humility when I say what I'm about to say. Instead, I am simply following precedent and tradition. My father was a great man, and as is the case with every instance of greatness of which I am aware, the reason is love. My father loved every single day of his life. He loved how he spent each day. He loved a routine Tuesday as much as he loved a special event. He loved riding his bike to work and watching his grandchildren play. He loved finding a way to sweat every day because that was how he thought it was best to stay healthy. He loved life. And he was deeply aware of the blessings of his life and grateful for them. In that context, I'd like to talk about what Anne calls the three great loves of Bob Fishback's life: family, his work at the bank, and our community. My father loved his family. Anne told several stories about Dad as a father and a grandfather, and those rang true for me. One thing that I can add is that beyond his pride and joy in being part of the Fishback family, my father loved his in-laws. For instance, for many years now, he and my mother have been visiting my uncle Mike Sebastian, Mom's brother, and my Aunt Marlene in Mason. And he would talk before each trip about looking forward to seeing Mike. After Uncle Mike's passing, he would be sad before the start of each trip, as he once again grappled with the fact that Mike wouldn't be there. He jumped in with both feet when Anne introduced him to Joel and I introduced him to Amanda. He loved them as he loved us. And while he was never the kind of parent to put pressure on us for grandchildren, I don't know if I ever saw him as happy as when he first met Will and then Franny. I wasn't there when he met Abby and Toby, but I am absolutely certain he was as overjoyed when he met them. I share Anne's gratitude for our mother's care for our dad, not just over the last few years, but for the decades of partnership before that. What I'd like to comment on briefly now is that my father was head over heels in love with and completely devoted to her. She was the person he most wanted to see every day that I can remember. And in his last year, the primary thing that impacted his mood was whether or not she was nearby. He held his siblings and their children in very high regard, and it was routine that we'd spend time together. He loved his mother, and along with my mom, worked very hard to support her across the last 10 years of her life as they supplied her with meals, helped with her daily routine, and spent time with her each day. My cousin Tom related to me that Dad referred to the years he overlapped at the bank with his father, Horace Jr., as the best of his career. Dan will have a better perspective than I on the way Dad tied together family and work and what it was like to be part of their family. But I will say that the example my parents set about how important and joyful it is to be part of a family made it obvious to me that what I wanted was first to be a strong part of the family I was born to, and second, that there was nothing more fun I could want in my own life than a family of my own. Dad's love of family didn't show up for the most part in grand gestures, but in consistent daily actions. One example is that I went to school at Central Elementary, which is now the Children's Museum, across the street from Dad's office at the bank. For several years in my early grades, I would often leave school at lunch, walk over to Dad's office, and we'd walk home together for lunch, and then walk back in time for class. At the time, that was great, because hey, lunch. But over time, those lunches added up to hours and hours of time together, walking or biking back and forth, and to the example of his love for his children not being a trade-off with his job. My father loved work, and he loved his work. I say that he loved both work and his work at the bank because it wasn't just that he loved his job. He loved working hard at things, and he was good at it. If you ask most people to describe my dad, they will say, almost to a person, that he was kind. And he was, probably the kindest person I've ever met in public and in private. But also, and this is a part that he would not care for, the man was brilliant. There's a group of his friends from college at Oberlin who meet on Zoom each week. One of them wrote to my mother after Dad passed, commenting that one of the things that made him a big part of their college experience is that he was one of the brightest students on campus. Immediately after he finished his undergraduate degree, he went immediately to get his master's in business administration. That's almost unheard of now for an undergrad to go directly to an MBA program without working first. And I had assumed that it must have been easier when Dad did it, until I looked. It was even less common then. He went to the University of Chicago for his MBA, and in the last few days I heard a great story about how one of his economics professors got stuck working through the math of a problem on the board at the front of the room, and his classmates said, "Bob, you better get up there and help him out." Which, the story goes, Dad did, and then returned to his seat. There's another story from Chicago that's just too good not to tell you, even though it's not about Dad's intelligence. It's about the opera. Dad wanted to see an opera, Aida, that was scheduled to perform at the Chicago Opera and learn how all of that worked. So what he did was audition to be a part of the opera. And he got a part dressed as a Roman guard on stage. As he and others filed on stage, they would be handed a long staff with a flag on it. Half the flags were red and half were green. Dad was supposed to take a green flag, but that was the wrong flag. Those with the green flags had to stand in a spot where they couldn't really see what was going on. So on the last night of the show, when Dad was heading to the stage, Dad took the other flag and stood where he could see. My daughter Francesca and I were telling stories about Dad the other day, and that's one I told. She sat down and wrote a reflection about it. We printed it out, and it's downstairs if you want to read it. He was brilliant. Combine that brilliance with kindness, and you're starting to get the picture, but there was something else. You could say that Dad was steady. He took information in and thought about it before reacting. He didn't get too high or too low. Or you could say that Dad was comfortable with his choices once he'd made them. Van once said to me, "Your dad was never susceptible to bullying because he always knew exactly who he was." But I like the way that my mom said it to a friend of hers, who quoted it back in an email to Mom after Dad passed. Bob would not yield. Any of you who saw Dad play tennis over the years, or who played pickup basketball and saw him refuse to hand off the responsibility of guarding players 20 years younger than he was, saw this. And the same was true of his health. He loved his life, and he would not yield. It wasn't just that he would never compromise or that he was always insistent on getting his own way, but he would make sure that in small daily choices over the long term and in important big choices, he and those around him were on the right track. He had a clear view of how to do things the right way, which was shaped by his fundamental kindness and driven by his smarts. And he expected himself to do things that right way. He held himself to his own standard constantly. And when he was frustrated, it was often with himself for not being able to do what he believed he should be able to do. That would have been exhausting if he didn't first love the work required to meet his own expectations, and second, if despite expecting things to be done the right way, when he found out things had worked out to his expectations, he didn't take that for granted. He was delighted. So he brought that love for work and for doing things right as he thought they should be done to his work at the bank. There are too many examples of that to count, but I like the story our CEO, Kevin Tetzloff, tells about when Kevin was an intern. He saw Dad walking up the sidewalk to the bank and noticed some litter over on the grass. Dad, who was then the CEO himself, didn't call somebody else to get it. He just walked over, picked it up, and put it in his pocket. He expected himself to maintain the standard, to take pride in his work. And in doing so, he set an example. I particularly like that story because several of my coworkers at First Bank and Trust have told me similar stories about something they saw Kevin do. In the remarks my father made at my grandfather's funeral, I was struck that one of the messages he seemed to be trying to send to the community was that the bank would be open the next day. I hope that my 730 coworkers at First Bank and Trust know how proud he would be today that I don't feel the need to reassure anyone of the health of the bank after his passing. One of the things that Dad said about his father in those comments was the fact that his life and his banking institution were synonymous is self-evident. The people who came into the bank were such a source of friendship and concern that for him, banking was not work, but a way of life. And that's absolutely true of my father, too. I wanted to talk about Dad's unique combination of tenacity and intellect and kindness to give context for the many, many stories I have heard over the years, and especially this week, from many of you about how Dad got you started or took a chance on you. Because while he absolutely wanted to help you, he wasn't just being kind. He believed in you, and he was delighted when things worked out. Sometimes, of course, they didn't, and Dad never thought less of anyone who tried hard, but had things just not work right. When I told my cousin Chip that Dad had passed, he shared a story with me from the time when Chip was working at the bank. They were in a loan officers meeting, and Chip reports that at one point, Dad just reminded them all that in the end, banking is about helping people. I think that's important. Dad didn't just think that a bank should help the community by providing volunteers or donations. He believed that the actual day-to-day work of banking was intended to help people. I've worked in and around banking my entire career, and you can imagine my surprise when I learned that not every banker sees it that way. Dad always did, and he set that example for the rest of us. And it is because banking is about helping people that he loved doing it. Which brings us to the time to talk about community. And Brookings, my father loved you. He loved this physical place, the trees lining residential streets, the stores downtown, the schools, the historic homes, the campus. He loved walking and biking between home and work in all kinds of weather. He loved the new bank building and his office in it, and he loved the old bank building and his office in that. And I realize, as I say this, that the new bank building is now nearly 20 years old. He loved the organizations and the institutions of this place: Rotary, school athletics, the library, venues and organizations for music and the arts, this church. He loved buying his clothes from Ken and Steve at Ferguson's, and he really loved eating at local restaurants. Every year, he would try to go to a high school reunion, whether it was for his class or not, and update the people there on what was happening in Brookings and to see them and keep them in touch. He was so grateful to the caregivers from Brookings Health, Interim, and Hospice who enabled him to spend his last year at home. And I know he would join Mom and Ann and I and our families in being deeply touched and thankful for the outpouring of support in these last few days, including notes and meals, meaningful donations to several organizations and memorials, and decorations throughout this church and the reception hall. And as we sat before the service and saw people come in, he would have loved to see you. Because he loved all of you, the people of his home community. He loved his time with you. Not long ago, after Mom and Dad returned from what may have been his last trip, a friend asked him what he missed about Brookings when he wasn't here. He answered, the citizens. I just love that. He could have said the people or the residents, but he said the citizens. A citizen isn't just living somewhere. A citizen is actively engaged in the community they live in. They're the ones serving as the treasurer for their organization. They're voting. They're starting a business or a club. They're going to school board meetings and school plays and concerts. They're the ones who hear about this European game called soccer, and they realize that because there's not a lot of expensive equipment, everyone can play, so they volunteer to coach a youth park and rec team before they learn the rules. And if that one sounds a little specific, it is because that is one Dad actually did. Citizens are invested in the place. They want it to be someplace special. That's what he was. That's the example he set for us. That's perhaps the best way we can remember him. Walk around this town. Drive around this county. You'll see his life everywhere. And we can try to follow his example. For those who don't live in Brookings all the time, let's take his example of citizenship to the community you're in. Be the best citizen you can. Be as kind as you can while you do it. In Brookings, to remember Bob Fishback, you know what to do. Go to the Bobcat game, the Jacks game, go to the high school concert, go to the play. Eat at a local restaurant you haven't tried yet, and become a regular at one that you already like. Ride your bike to work. Play tennis on the Hillcrest courts or join a pickup game wherever you can find. Stand on the curb for the parade. Go to the library. Visit the museums. Support education. Love your kids. And when you see someone else doing those things, think of my dad.
While John was speaking, but also for the past 25 years of my life, I thought, was Jimmy Stewart playing Bob in that movie, It's a Wonderful Life? It seemed to me sometimes that they paralleled one another. We have another hymn, and you may not recognize this hymn. Maybe a handful of you may have heard it at some point in your life, but I don't believe many of you will know this hymn. However, it was Bob's father's favorite hymn, and it's a story right out of the book of Matthew. So please join together in singing Fierce Was the Wild Billow. This is not in any hymn book that I can find anywhere. However, it is on the insert in your bulletin today. So if you would be so good as to try to sing verses 1, 2, and 3 of Fierce Was the Wild Billow.
Now I would like to invite Bob's brother, Van, to come forward and speak.
I assume we don't need to go through the introductions again? It's humbling for me to be here now, especially after listening to the girls and their contribution, and Ann and John. Thank you very much. I'm going to begin with a story. It may be something that you've heard before. Probably not, because it happened to me, so I'm not sure where I would have told you. But it happened when I was a freshman in college. And I was attending a class, I was signed up for a class called General Science. And most of you in the room know, when you see that title, it means bonehead science. It means that's what we take in order to graduate when we're not smart enough to take a straight up science like chemistry or something like that. But we were in our first year of college, and sometime during the second quarter, Dr. Alvarez Garcia stopped his lecture maybe 10, 15 minutes before the end of the period. And he said, I want to show you something. And he stepped away from the desk and reached down, and he pulled up a large mason jar. You know, one of those big things that's clear that you can carry a lot of things in. And then beside that, he picked up a bucket of large rocks. And he took the rocks and he started putting them in one by one into the mason jar. And then he asked us students, is the jar full? And most of us, of course, were getting nervous because it was getting close to the end of the hour, and you could hear notebooks clip and all this sort of stuff, shuffling of papers and so on. Yeah, it looks full. And then he said, well, what about this? And he reaches up and takes out another tray of pebbles and smaller rocks. And he starts putting them in the jar. And finally he stopped and said, is the jar full? And people were starting to get a little bit interested. Some people were maybe a little skeptical. Some people were probably saying, yeah, it's full. Come on, let's go. And then he reached down and picked up a sack of sand, and he poured more sand into the mason jar until it appeared that it was full. And then he asked them again, is the jar full? And most people by that time knew there was some sort of trick or something was up. And so they waited for him, and he picked up a pitcher of water and poured it into the jar, and then it was full. And he asked the students, he asked us, so what does this mean? Why did we do this exercise? And people were pretty engaged by that time. They said, well, it's, how about the expression, there's always room for more? Or maybe it doesn't hurt to be small. Smaller is better. Or maybe squeeze in and there's room for more. And Dr. Alvarez Garcia stopped and said, no. The message of this experiment or this demonstration is always put the large chunks in first. And that's always stuck with me. Put the large pieces in, put the large chunks in, do what's important. Patty and family, I hope that I won't get excommunicated for this, but I'm now going to say Bob was the chunkiest man I ever knew. He didn't sweat the small stuff. He wasn't bothered by the noise that so many of us get all knotted up by. He didn't worry about the pebbles or the sand or the water. He connected with the big issues in life and the important things in life. And I think we've heard a lot about that from Ann and John already this afternoon. He was grounded in the important parts of life. Most of us are here today because of our connection one way or the other with Bob, and we have stories about him. And we have, you know, some of them are kind of light, should we say. I can remember one of the stories I have about Bob is the fact that he always gave his opponent the benefit of the doubt in a tennis match of maybe a tough call. He would not call the line in his favor. He would give the benefit graciously, happily, generously to his opponent. Or how about all the phone calls that you people have received when you're in Florida and you need a car? And he says, just write a check. Come in as soon as you can. Or you're at a sale barn and you go buy a bunch of stock cows. Write a check. Come in. Trust, faithfulness, understanding the situation, understanding what is important and what's right. That's what all these little stories are about. They're about lifting things up into a bigger chunk, into the important things in life. So we could sit here and have a discussion about the large chunks in Bob's life, the things that he represented. And there'd be more chunks than the mason jar can hold. And if we started talking about them all, we would be here until the cows come home. There would just not be enough time to think about all the wonderful, solid, mature ways he went about handling his life, handling his family, handling the bank, handling the community. Let me read just a few of them, though. I'm not going to expand on them. I'm just going to comment. Things I think about: steady, dedicated, courteous, quiet, kind, trusting, trustworthy, speak softly, loyal, caring for others, obsessed with service for others. Doesn't it all kind of ring true somehow to you with the stories that you have? And that's why I think we're here today. He lives on in our hearts and our minds. But I hope he lives on in a way that is a serious legacy for all of us. It gives us encouragement as to how to move forward. It's truly a legacy. And he is the chunkiest person I've ever met. Thank you.
Thank you, Van. And now we come to the close of this service, but not the end of Bob's story in our lives. Today, we've heard many of Bob's stories. We've laughed, we've cried, we've been reminded of his character, his generosity, and the many ways he touched the lives of those around him. Each of you carries your own memory of Bob, your own story of how he made a difference in your life. I encourage you to take a moment soon to share that story with the family, whether it's in fellowship after this service or maybe later on, a call, an email, a note, to let the family know how Bob mattered to you. On behalf of the family, I thank you for being here today. Every person in this room represents a life that Bob shaped, a connection he made, and by sharing this time together, we honor the ways that he touched us all. And now, as we bring this service to a close, we take the final step. Entrusting Bob to God's care. Franny, we talked about this, right? So now we commend Bob to God's care. Into your hands, O merciful protector, we commend your servant, Robert Fishback. Acknowledge, we humbly pray, a sheep of your own fold, a lamb of your own flock, a sinner of your own redeeming. Receive him into the arms of your mercy, into the blessed rest of eternal peace, and into the glorious company of the saints in heaven. And now together we sing our closing hymn, Now the Day is Over, number 541 in our blue hymnal, and we'll sing verses 1 through 4. Please remain seated while the family recesses. You're invited to join everyone in the fellowship hall in the basement for light refreshments. As you exit to the right, you'll see stairs that go down into the fellowship hall. If you need to use the elevator, as you exit, go straight down the hall and you'll find the elevator at the left, and a member of our church will be there to help you with that.